Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I am so excited for today's topic. I love talking about applications. I love working with international candidates, and I'm really excited that you've decided to spend part of your day with us. I'm hoping to impart some great wisdom upon you with our conversation today. So, before we get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, why I think you might want to listen to me today. My name is Ashley Lotzenheiser. Here at Forte, I'm the director of pre-MBA programs. I've worked at Forte for over 5 years now. I have the absolute privilege to oversee programs like our MBA launch program that helps nearly 1,000 candidates every year prepare their best applications to business school. Prior to working at Forte, I worked in admissions and recruiting on the MBA side mostly for over 10 years. So in the past kind of 15 years I've had in the industry, I'd like to think I know a thing or two about admissions. And I'm really excited today to share some of that wisdom with you to help you on your journey to business school. So with our time together, I'm going to talk just briefly about the work that we do here at Forte. If you're new to us, you're unfamiliar with the work, I'm going to cover that. Then I'm going to talk about applications to business school, give you some tips kind of as you're going through this journey, depending on where you are. And then I will also have some time for questions. So if you have questions, I would love to hear from you as we go through. Also, if you have any questions, don't feel like you have to wait till the end. Feel free to drop those in the Q&A as we go along. I think that's going to be great. I would love to hear from all of you as well. So here at Forte, we are all about fueling the future of business, helping make business school a reality for more candidates. As I mentioned, we offer programming like our amazing MBA launch program to help you build a better application to business school. We do work with over 60 member business schools across the US, Canada, UK, and Europe. And so no matter where you're looking for an education, we are super excited to help the MBA be a part of your future. Also, we know there might be many different reasons you're considering an MBA, and whatever has brought you to the MBA journey, we are excited because there's lots of different reasons why you might be thinking about an MBA. They're all valid. They might be different depending on your background, depending on where you are in this process. They can also change and evolve. So understand that today you might be seeking an MBA. Maybe you just want to change your career. Maybe you're like, I don't like this job anymore. I don't like this industry. I want to try something new. An MBA is a great way to make a pivot. It's a great way to be, if you're interested in being a career changer, a great way to change locations, change industries, change functions. It's also just a great way to grow your network, find more people that you want to be a part of. It's also a great way if you didn't study business or you don't feel like you've gotten those business fundamentals from your work. It's also a great way to lay that foundation. Finally, the MBA is a great return on investment. So really practically, it's a great way to make more money. Many candidates see significant increase in their salary upon doing the MBA. The average starting salary, this is, I believe, among top 50 programs in the US. The top median, kind of like median base salary among top 10 programs is closer to 150 to 175. Signing bonuses can be upwards of 30K for MBA programs. So really practically, it's a great way to think about your earning potential as you go forward. Now, if you're here with us live, I am going to attempt to launch a poll as we go through. I'd love to hear about kind of where you're targeting on MBA programs, because one of the things that we're going to talk about today is how important it is to think about kind of your story as a critical piece of the application process. So if you're here with us live, we'd love to hear a little bit about kind of where you're targeting, because that will influence some of our conversation today. And I'll say any of the the tips I'll give today are true no matter where you're applying, if you're applying in your home country or somewhere else in the world. The other thing I'll say is if you are applying to an MBA program outside of your home country, I'm going to try to infuse as much specific advice as I can for those candidates. But no, kind of the same threads are true regardless of kind of where you're targeting an MBA program. So that's my kind of caveat for our conversation today. So thank you for participating in that poll. I will get to those responses here in just a moment. So one of the most important things you're going to do throughout the application is tell your story. Storytelling is absolutely the critical piece of your application. And three big questions that you're going to be answering through your application to business school. Why you want an MBA? Why do you want it now? And why do you want your MBA from that particular program? And your application to a program should answer these questions, right? Should answer lots of questions, but certainly should answer these 3 questions. And I think it's really important as you're thinking about these, you might have a kind of a quick snap answer, right? Oh, well, I want to do an MBA because I want to go into product management in a tech company. Okay, great. A really critical piece of storytelling in the application is to go deeper than those surface level answers. So what I advise candidates, and one of the things we work on a lot in our launch program, is asking and going deeper on the answers to these questions to really find kind of some of the fundamental truths about yourself through the application process. Probably the most important thing you'll do through the application process is self-reflection, introspection, really thinking about yourself, because this is a self-centered process. You should be thinking about yourself all the time as you go through the application process. So often I challenge candidates, so why are you thinking about an MBA? To give me a surface answer. Okay, why? And then they give me, oh, well, I don't really like my job. I like the ideas of, ABC within, product management. Okay, well, what is it about those that is going to help you get up every day and want to do that, right? So really digging into those answers. And the other thing that's going to help you do, in addition to ensuring that you're truthful in this process, as authentic as possible, it's also going to help you be really specific. Because the more specific you can be in the application, the more unique your application will be. And you don't want your application to be just like everybody else's application, right? No cookie cutters here. We want special individuals as they apply to business school. So really try to go as deep as you can in answering some of these questions. So as I said, this is something we do a lot specifically in the launch program, is helping you tell your story authentically. And as I said, one of the critical first pieces you're going to do is some self-reflection. Now, very tied to why you want an MBA is very likely related to your career goals. So the MBA is a generalist degree at its core. So that means you can kind of go into any industry, any function with an MBA. But there are some popular industries for MBAs. These are in ascending order. So consulting is the top industry that MBA graduates go into, followed by finance and technology, so on. This is not a comprehensive list, but hopefully from this list, you can tell there's a lot of different things you can do with an MBA, right? And if you're interested in an MBA because you want to go into technology, your why might look very different than someone who's looking to go into entertainment. So again, this self-reflection piece, this storytelling is really important. And it really comes down to being able to articulate your career goals very specifically. So I will say, sometimes candidates say, they're like, great, I want to do an MBA because I want to do strategy consulting at MBB. Like, okay, that is a perfectly fine answer. I will say it's a very generic answer. In admissions, I probably heard it once a day, if not more than that. As I said, it's a great thing to want to do. But again, my question is why? And I think you need to really think about your why as it relates to career goals. Be honest with yourself, right? If the reason you want to do a job is because it's super prestigious, that's okay. You should be honest about that, though, right? Don't try to paper over it and say, "Well, I want to do it because I'm gonna, better the world." Like that's okay. Not everybody's out here to save the world, right? You want to be authentic in that process. So I think it's important to ask yourself why and be honest about some of the reasons, right? And know that some of those reasons might resonate better with admissions committees than others, right? And know that maybe your goals aren't aligned with every program out there. So as you're thinking about your career goals, typically schools are going to ask you for your short-term goals, which usually means what you want to do kind of immediately post-graduation. So what's your job you want? You're on graduation day from your MBA program. You're like, great, I'm graduating today and I'm about to start my job doing A at company B, right? What is it that you're going to be doing short term? Long-term goals for an MBA program could be 5 years out, they could be 10 years out, they could be kind of your big capstone career that you'd like to have, right? And I think you need to think about both. So what's short term and what's long term? And know that sometimes one of those is going to be more clear than the other. So maybe you have really clear short-term goals, right? Maybe that is that strategy consulting role at MBB, right? That's a short-term goal. But maybe your longer-term goal is still a little nebulous. Maybe you're just thinking, well, I want to do consulting because I want to see what else is out there. I want to get that exposure, right? Great. Maybe you're not as sure about what you want to do in 10 to 15 years. Conversely, maybe you know exactly where you want to be in 10 to 15 years. 10 to 15 years, I want to be starting my own nonprofit to do XYZ, right? Awesome. I'm not sure how to get there though, right? So here are some short-term goals I've thought about. It's okay if the clarity on your short and long-term goals is not the same, but I think you need to again recognize when that's happening. A big tip I have for anyone, especially who's a international candidate, meaning you're applying to a country outside of your home country, a country where maybe the employment is just going to be a little more complicated, whether that's because of visa or anything like that, right? So when there's that added layer of complication, I do highly recommend that candidates especially think about not only what is plan A, right? What's your ideal short-term goal? What is it, that job you want right after graduation? But what does plan B look like, right? So if that doesn't happen, what's plan B? Is there another location you're willing to work in? Is there another job or industry that you're particularly interested in? And then also think about plan C, right? What are you potentially willing to settle for should the landscape of the world change again? So thinking about plan A, be very firm on that, but also have that flexibility to understand plan B or plan C and have done some research about what is feasible for candidates like yourself, okay? Because everyone has wonderful potential. An MBA program is going to admit you to the program because you're a great fit and they see great potential in you. But there's no guarantee, no MBA program can guarantee you a job. And no one's out there guaranteeing a job, right? But you do really want to think critically about what your backup plan might look like and how that might fit into the programs that you're looking for. Again, being honest with yourself about what you're looking for. At this stage in the process, you can really be thinking about all the programs that exist in the world. And even once you've been admitted to the program, right, you are still shopping around until you're showing up on day one. Okay. So there's lots of different factors that might come in to your choice of MBA program. And again, just like why you're thinking about an MBA, why you're thinking about a specific program, some of these might be really important to you. Some of them may not matter. So thank you for those of you that participated in the poll. We did have some good diversity of interest of kind of where you are thinking about programs. It seems like the majority of the audience today is targeting programs in the United States, but there's also significant interest in the UK and EU. So I love that. I have a couple of examples to go on that. And no matter where you're looking in the world, I'll try to kind of give you some clarity here as well. So there's lots of different kind of factors that you might be using to determine which MBA program is going to be on your list, right? And think of it as a list. Like you can have your dream school for sure, but it's nice to have a couple dream schools. So be thinking about your list and early in the process. So if you're still maybe a year out or a few months out from applying, think of adding to your list rather than kind of cutting schools down. Think of adding to your list. And then as you get closer to submitting applications, that's when you can start thinking about, who's on the margin, who might still be in the consideration list, but maybe you're not submitting an application to quite yet. Okay. So there's lots of different things to be thinking about. A couple that I want to highlight, especially since we were just talking about career outcomes. One might be thinking about the experiential or the hands-on opportunities that you're going to get in an MBA program. This is especially important if you are making an industry shift and or a functional shift. So again, if you maybe want to transition into something like consulting, but you've had no consulting experience, well, then maybe look for MBA programs that have great consulting experiential opportunities. My tip here is most schools do. So consulting is very, very popular. Many, if not all schools will have something that sounds like a real life consulting opportunity. Schools have these all over. Sometimes it's for local companies. Sometimes it's international. Sometimes you're going to be working on, a full semester. Sometimes it's a class. These exist pretty much at every business school. Other opportunities that might exist that might sound, that might be a little more aligned with what you're looking for again are these opportunities ones where you maybe get to travel? Maybe that's interesting to you. Maybe you want experience in your target country. Another opportunity that you might think about is what other experiential opportunities exist. Maybe you're going to consult for a nonprofit. Maybe that's interesting to you, right? Maybe you're consulting for a startup. If you have entrepreneurial interests, really digging into what those mean and what makes it unique across programs. Because again, most programs have some consulting, something. They're going to call it all different things. They're going to brand it differently, but they exist pretty much at every school. Another thing to consider here is maybe the size of the cohort. So again, that self-reflection piece is going to be really critical here. Do you want a really big cohort, so you're building the largest network possible, but maybe those connections are a little less strong? Or do you want a really tight-knit, small community? You're going to know everybody. You're going to be, going to everybody's birthday party. Like, what sort of experience do you want to have, not only while you're in the MBA program, but also once you graduate? What is that network going to look like upon graduation as well? Along that line, maybe you're going to a business school that's a part of a larger university that has a very strong brand, or maybe you're going to a business school because that larger university has some attribute that's important to you, whether that's a big sports team or a really specific network. So thinking not only about the business school cohort size, but maybe the larger university that you're joining as well. And if you're coming to a program from outside of the United States, know that that's kind of a really critical piece, is business schools, kind of their tie within the larger university in the US as well. The other thing I'll mention here particularly is location. And this can mean the country in which you're interested in. So again, whether that's, you're targeting a big chunk of the world, like I'm going to target schools within maybe, the entire Asia Pacific region. But location can also mean what type of experience that's going to be. Is it a very urban campus where you're in the city center? Or are you outside of the city? So, if you're targeting programs, for example, in France, is that program in Paris or is that program in Nice, right? Those are two very different experiences that you're going to have, right? So thinking about location, really diving into that. If you are, because I know we have a lot of candidates that mention targeting schools in the US, for anyone applying to schools in the US, think about the difference in living in a city, a big city. Going to school in New York is going to be very different than going to a school in maybe what we would consider kind of a college town, where there's a town built around the university. So lots of people live in that city because of the university. That's going to inform the experiences that you have outside of the classroom. And a big piece of the MBA is the learnings that are going to take place outside of the classroom, and certainly kind of the people in the community that you're going to live with as well. Yeah, I'm going to pause there. There's a lot to say about program choice. Again, the first piece in understanding which program is going to be best for you is really understanding yourself and understanding your goals. And then that's going to inform your ability to determine which programs are really going to be a great fit for you. Also, along the lines of program choice are school research. So one of the best things you can do to learn about a school is to attend a school event. And we all now live in a time where schools do lots of virtual events. Really helpful to be able to go to a virtual event, especially if it's one where you get to interact with maybe current students or alumni. Thinking about, are these people that you can see yourself sitting next to in the classroom? How have their career transitions looked post MBA? Are they doing the jobs you want after graduation? Are they living in the places that you want after graduation? And really getting a sense of those. So I would say primary source material is super helpful as you go through the school research process. At Forte, we have a couple events I will plug. I'll also mention, lots of schools will travel all over the world to connect with students. And so if there's an event going on in the city where you live or nearby, it oftentimes is very advantageous to you to go to see that event in person. I'll also mention we have our forum events. We have one on Friday. We have one upcoming in December. We bring together big groups of schools as well. So that event in December will have like 60 schools there virtually. Kind of a one-stop shop if you want to check out a bunch of schools all at once. A great way to go ahead and do that at an event like the forum. So as you're thinking about which schools are going to fit you, right? I like to think about schools fitting you, not you fitting schools, right? As you think about the schools fitting you, you're going to want to kind of continue that research process. The other thing I'll mention is this research process does not stop once you've submitted an application. So once you submit an application and you think, hey, this school is a great fit for me, you're going to keep researching. You're going to keep talking to students. You're going to keep talking to alumni, because if you get an offer of admission from that school, hopefully you get lots of offers, and they're going to have to choose between those schools, right? So you're really going to have to start thinking about which one's going to be best for you and taking into account all those different factors. Great. I'm going to pause. There was a question here. Any specific tips for MBA candidates are hoping to use the executive MBA to pivot out of public and into the private sector? Yeah. So kind of the general career transition for an executive candidate likely looks different than that of a full-time candidate. So, most full-time candidates, the average work experience is probably in the like 5-ish years, right? That could be anywhere from like 2 to 10, but maybe the average years of work experience in a full-time program is 5-ish years, right? So you have a big piece of your career to come post MBA. Executive MBA candidates, typically the average work experience might be anywhere from 10 to 20, sometimes more work experience. You're more advanced in your career. Typically, I say MBA candidates oversee people, projects, and budgets. So they're kind of more advanced in their career. I would say most MBA candidates aren't necessarily looking to make a big transition. And you'll also want to check because not all executive programs offer the same type of career services that a full-time program does. So you'll need to check, is that something where looking for a job during an MBA program is going to, be a little more difficult because you're the only one, or are there really strong career services at that school? So you'll really want to do your school research if you are an executive MBA candidate and looking to make a job transition as well. For anyone who's doing a working professional program, meaning you're going to continue working while you're doing an MBA, anyone that's doing that program, make sure you also just look at the requirements. Most schools, if something happens and you get laid off or you leave your job, most schools in a working professionals program have some leeway for that. But some schools might say, you need to be a fully employed student to do our executive or a part-time program, and maybe you only get a semester before you need to transition to a different format or put a pause on the program. So as you're doing your research, just think about that if you are doing something like a working professionals program. All right. We're going to dive into some specific application components, and hopefully I'll be able to give you some good advice on some of these specific application components. And I think, as I said, this is some good overall advice. I would say the advice I'm going to give, I'll give some specifics for international candidates, meaning if you're applying outside of your home country, but I think a lot of what I'll say is true for everybody, okay? So a big kind of overarching theme, I would say, as it pertains to the application process to business school, one thing that might help you, hopefully, maybe with the stress a little bit, is understanding that there are parts of the application that you will have control over. There are things you can change. And then there are parts of the application that really you can't do anything about, okay? They are what they are, and you're just going to have to put them to bed, okay? So an example of that, things that you can change, your GMAT score. If you have not yet taken the GMAT or a standardized exam, this is something under your control, right? You have the ability to continue studying for this program. And I would say it's one of the most changeable pieces of your application. You can study, you can retake. This is worth effort and time. Test scores are not the most important part of an application. I think all of my admissions friends will back me up. It's not the most important part of the application, but it is a part of the application, and it's important. It can be an indicator of your academic ability. It's a standardized measure, meaning we can use it across candidates from all different types of backgrounds. If you're applying to a really diverse MBA program, it can be really helpful as they think about comparing candidates from all over the globe. And so this is something to take seriously. There's great resources on MBA.com about building a study kind of timeline. This is something we go through in our launch program. But again, this is some place you're going to want to spend some time and effort. It is not a cheap exam. And so you don't want to just take it cold. Do not recommend that. But you will want to take some time to study. And also, if necessary, build in some time potentially to retake the exam. Oftentimes we can see the candidates take it more than once. Schools have no issue with that typically. They want you to do your best. They want you to submit your best score possible. But just know this is definitely one where you're going to want to put some time and effort as well. Now, conversely, something that is, unless you're still an undergrad, something that is out of your control now is your undergraduate record. So how you did as an undergraduate student. Again, unless you're still a student, this is now set in stone. You can't go back and change your grades. You cannot. But your undergraduate record is very important, right? Because a very good indicator of how you do in a formal academic environment is how you have previously done in a formal academic environment. So those grades are important. And when schools look at your grades, they are not just looking to see like, oh, did you get all high marks? Did you get all A's, right? They're looking to see what classes you took, how you did in those classes. Were there any trends? So maybe your first year was difficult, you were transitioning, maybe something happened while you were an undergraduate, so there's a rough semester. Were you kind of up and to the right the whole time? Did you have a little too much fun your last year? They're going to be looking at your entire transcript. And I will say, having sat on admissions committee, having read thousands of applications, we spend a lot of time looking at this, a lot of quality time reading through this. And I will also say, one concern I often hear from international students is, well, I went to school outside of the US or I went to school outside of Europe. How do they know about my school? Well, that was one of the great things about admissions is I knew lots of schools all over the globe. I did lots of international recruiting. I pretty much knew, probably the top 20 schools in every country I would visit, right? I was pretty familiar with it. We knew the education systems. Also, your schools do a great job of providing us information. Sometimes on the back of the transcript, they'll give us the grading scale. There's lots of information on there. So don't feel like you need to explain the school that you went to, because also if I'm confused about it, I will look it up. Okay. I will do the work to understand the school that you went to. The other thing I'll just mention kind of from a logistics standpoint, when you submit an application for business school, know what the requirements for the submission of materials is. So do they just want the transcript? They might also want, sometimes they want something called a proof of graduation, or a copy of your diploma. Typically things you can just scan in during the application process, but know what they're going to want. Sometimes they want the front and the back of the transcript because there might be material in the back, that sort of thing. So just make sure you read that, especially if you're an international candidate, because sometimes those requirements are particularly helpful for the admissions committee as they're reviewing. Okay, but just know we probably know your school. Okay. This is a side note. I used to have a colleague that also knew pretty much every school mascot of everywhere in the United States. So that was a fun party trick he would pull out during admissions committee. So anyway, so that's something that is set in stone. If you're worried about your undergraduate GPA because of something that happened, there is an optional essay. I'll talk a little bit about in a bit, but just know that there's a way that you can address that through the application process. Okay. Let's talk about work experience. So your work experience is absolutely super important as you go through the application to business school. So typically they're going to have you submit that in either a resume or a CV. Look on the school's website, see what the specific requirement is. They might even have a format preference. So there are some schools that have a format preference on how you submit the resume. Some schools might say it needs to be one page unless you've worked for 15 plus years. Some schools say resume or CV, and just know that there's some kind of differences on typically what appears on those two documents. The other thing I'll say is when you're submitting a resume or CV, whatever it is, I would say avoid as much kind of jargon as you can. Understand what is a common, maybe abbreviation or term within your industry, and then what's kind of common within the wider world. So, a KPI is something that's used everywhere. But if you have some really obscure abbreviation that you use in your industry that only someone that works at your company or your industry is going to understand, just think about the readability of your resume. Also, to fit it all on one page, sometimes candidates, you all get really serious about the small fonts. I do not want to pull out a magnifying glass, so keep it readable. So think about if you printed it out, would you be able to read this? A lot of admissions committees, they're going to read on a screen. So make sure it's just readable, right? And normal-ish, actually have margins. That'd be great, right? But again, we need to be able to actually read the document that you're submitting here, okay? The other thing I'll say about work experience is oftentimes in the application, there are pieces that are going to ask you about work experience that might come across in a short answer question, right? So there might be a question in there where that's going to ask you what's your current job? Who's your current employer? There's a lot of kind of sometimes just data that you're going to have to enter into the application. And just be cognizant that that is there. Don't be rushing through the application and misspell your employer. Don't be the person that misspelled their name on their resume. That's also embarrassing, right? So just think about those little details that are going to go into the application too. Personal statements and essays. I usually try to say personal statement because I think sometimes essay has a connotation of kind of creativity that isn't necessary in all applications. It's really about you. My two biggest tips for essays are one, the biggest pitfall is being generic. That is the worst. That is the death of the essay, right? Being as generic, not being specific, trying to make one essay work for all schools. Oh, terrible. Okay. The other pitfall is using AI incorrectly in your essay writing process. It is very tempting to use AI to brainstorm. It's very tempting to use AI to let it write your essay. Admissions committees read thousands of essays. They have a super sniffer. Okay. They will be able to pick out if you have written your essay with AI. They have read, I would rather read a essay that is authentic and specific and maybe the grammar isn't perfect, then I would read an AI essay all day long, right? I actually want to hear from you. You are the one that's going to show up in class, so don't let ChatGPT write your essay for you. Okay, super straightforward. Um, the other piece here is letters of recommendation. So biggest tip here is do not write your own letter of recommendation. Some recommenders will ask you to do it. Hey, can you write it and I'll just sign it? No, don't do that. That is a huge red flag. Okay. But my thing about letters of recommendation here is know the rules on who to ask. So schools might want you to ask your current direct supervisor. Well, if you're not telling your work that you're leaving, you might not be in a position to ask your direct supervisor, right? So who's the backup to that, right? Understand the school's preferences and recommendations, understand who you're going to be able to ask, give them lots of lead time for this. You never want someone to do a rushed letter of recommendation. The other piece is some schools use what's called the GMAC Common Letter of Recommendation. It does make this process a little bit easier. You can see what recommenders are asked through that, and most schools will tell you what the recommender process is going to look like. But you're going to want to give them lots of time. You are also going to want to be able to follow up with them and then give them a thank you. Okay. No matter what happens, take them out to coffee, send them a box of chocolates, whatever they want, as a thank you for writing the letter. Even if you don't get into the school, right? You still want to thank them for their time here as well. A couple other requirements I want to mention. I'm going to kind of pivot off of these core requirements. So let me just see if there's any questions here. Great. There's a question about the executive assessment. So standardized tests, the GMAT is the original exam for business school. It was invented, basically like developed by business school. So there was the MCAT for medical school, there was the LSAT for law school, and business schools were like, well, we're cool too. We're going to make our own exam. It's called the GMAT. And it was built for business school, right? It's an exam that still to this day has hundreds of member schools that influence the exam. Nowadays, schools also typically accept the GRE exam. GRE. There's also another test called the EA, the executive assessment, that typically was developed for executive MBA programs. Some schools may accept that as an alternative to the GMAT or the GRE. I would say an Ashley opinion here is if you're taking the executive assessment, but you're applying to full-time programs, I'm going to be curious why you're taking the executive assessment and not just taking the GMAT. My opinion on the executive assessment is there's a little less granularity in the scores of the executive assessment than there is in the GMAT. So I would say that's going to be a question you probably want to ask more in depth, whether you do it through doing our MBA launch program or elsewhere. I'm going to say that's going to be you're going to have to probably dive into that a little bit deeper, is what I'll say about that. All right, some other requirements you might not think about, but you're definitely not going to want to forget. If you're applying to a country outside of your home country and your first language is not the country or not the language in which the program will be administered, you may need English proficiency testing. And this might vary slightly school to school. When I worked at a school in the United States. Our typical requirement was if you attended a school where English was not the language of instruction, you were required to take an English proficiency exam like the TOEFL or the IELTS exam, or if you were from a country where the primary language was not English, this might have been required of you. So you just need to look at each school. If you have an English proficiency exam score, typically that can be a helpful piece, especially if you've done well. That can be a helpful piece in the application. Maybe even if it isn't required, but you have it, that can be helpful. Typically, the expiration on English proficiency exams is not very long. So typically, it's not a 5-year expiration like the GMAT. It can be a little bit shorter. So just know that as well. Also know that there are some programs that have that have a language requirement outside of just English proficiency. So for example, there's a program in Europe that does require a secondary language. That is something you're definitely going to want to know. That might be a really easy way for you to eliminate that from your list if you only speak one language, right? So just know about the language requirements of school. So if you're going to a program outside of your home country where the primary language in that country is not your first or second language, it can be a great way for you to be exposed to that new language, but just be thinking about what that experience is going to be like. Because once you go into the city, they might be speaking that other third language or that second language, and that might be a great experience for you. It might be something you're excited about, but if that's something you're not excited about, think about that location of the program as well. Okay. I think I've said enough about language requirements, just something to think about. But I will say, broadly speaking, MBA programs, I should have said this earlier, MBA programs are really looking for diversity. They're looking for candidates from all different backgrounds. They want candidates from all over the world. And so those things that make you special and wonderful, like the ability to speak multiple languages, is usually a wonderful thing. The optional essay. So most candidates do not need to complete the optional essay. That is why schools call it the optional essay. There are times, however, in which you are strongly encouraged, if not required, to submit an optional essay as a part of the application. These may include if you have ever had any sort of academic probation or infraction while you were at the university during an undergrad, these would be required. If there's something you'd like to address in your application, and this is usually a pretty short list, maybe something that happened to you as an undergraduate where your grades suffered, something kind of traumatic in your life that you'd like to share, that's a way to use the optional essay. But for the vast majority of candidates, you're not going to be submitting an optional essay. I would not recommend using the optional essay to talk about testing. That's not something that you are going to probably want to address in an optional essay. But as you said, for the vast majority of candidates, you're not going to have to do this. So don't worry about it. The other thing I'll mention is interviews, right? Know the interview policy at schools. Some schools have open interview invitations. Some schools will only send interview invitations after you apply. I would say that's the most common, right? Some schools, the interview will be with someone from the admissions team. It could be from a current student. It could be an alumni ambassador. Lots of different ways. Interviews could be virtual. They could be on campus. They could be in your home country conducted by an alumni. Everything under the sun is possible for interviews. A couple things I'll say about interviews, pardon me, that I think are key. One is, again, know the policy. So like, don't be asking for an interview if the school doesn't interview until you submit an application if you haven't submitted an application. So know the policy there. The other thing I'll say about interviews is interviews are very different than an essay. An essay, you want to be polished and clean and have reviewed. You want to share it with other people. Again, the interview, however, you can over prepare an interview. You can go online and probably see the questions that you're going to get asked in interviews. You could just Google, not that I'm saying you should, Google interview questions asked by ABC program for MBA. And I guarantee you there's a thread somewhere on the internet that will tell you, well, I just got interviewed. Here's exactly what they asked me, right? You could probably find that online. And you could go out and you could like, okay, let me type out my answers to these questions, right? That's writing an essay. That's not conducting an interview. An interview is a conversation where you're going to have interaction with the person that's asking you questions. So you can absolutely over prepare for the interview and that will come across. And then I'm not going to get your authentic answers, right? The other thing I'll say about an interview is if you're doing it virtually, which I would say for most candidates, if you're applying to a program outside your country, you're probably going to be doing a virtual interview. A couple things. One is make sure you have the time right, especially if you're doing it in a different time zone. Make sure you've converted, like daylight savings time, I don't know, phases of the moon, whatever you got to do. Make sure you are there at the right time for the interview. Be early. Have rock solid internet. And if you are any doubt of your ability to have rock solid internet, have a backup. So if you are somewhere and you're like, all right, I got my internet, but I also can, plug in if I need to, and I have a hotspot. Great. Things happen. We totally understand, but don't be the person that shows up and is having internet issues, right? The other thing is know who you're going to be speaking with. So as much as possible, if they tell you ahead of time, find out if that person is a student, an alum, or an admissions rep, because you're going to have a different interaction with them, right? If you're talking to a current student, you can ask them questions about their experience in the MBA program. Whereas if you're talking to someone who works on the admissions team, yes, they might be on campus every day, but they're not an MBA student. So know the different types of questions that you're going to ask of those. That can be really helpful. And be ready with some good questions, right? Don't ask an admissions rep something that you could Google or that you could find on their website, right? Don't ask what your chances of getting in are. Know what comes next, right? And ask some good, respectful questions of your interviewer. This is also something we do a lot of prep up in the launch program, kind of practicing this, understanding the types of questions that are going to get asked, how to respond appropriately. This is definitely something we go through a lot. The last thing I'll mention is some schools do look at demonstrated interest, this is literally what it sounds like, how you have demonstrated that you were interested in that program. So what that could mean is, Are you just submitting an application out of the blue? And they're like, well, we've never heard from this person before. How did you find out about us? We know nothing about you. Or have you gone to a coffee chat? Did you see them at the Forte Forum? Have you, emailed a thank you letter? Things like that. Have you had any interaction with the school so far? Have you talked to an ambassador? Things like that. Did you fill out an interest form? Those things can matter to a school. Also, for schools that you are able to visit, have you made the effort to do so, right? I do not expect anyone to fly over around the world or sometimes even fly across the state to see a program, right? That's just not feasible for many candidates. But, if you live down the street and you haven't been to campus, or you tell me you have a work project and you're here every week and you haven't been to campus, then, I'd be like, how interested are you? You couldn't go by and say hi. But again, that demonstrated interest only matters to some schools, and it's not something I would concern yourself with. But for the schools that you're really interested in, making sure you make an effort to connect with them is a great idea. So there are lots of different pieces of the application. It can seem a little overwhelming, but again, there are things that you still have under your control, and then other things that you're going to just have to make peace with as you go through this process. And again, know that not all these pieces are going to require the same amount of effort. And not all these pieces are going to require the same amount of effort across candidates as well. So if you know somebody else who's applying to an MBA program, well, maybe the GMAT wasn't super challenging for them and they're happy with the score, whereas maybe there's a score you're trying to achieve and you're spending a lot more time on that. This is definitely an area where you're not going to want to try to compare yourself across candidates. There's room for all of you in business school. We're going to help you find the business school that's right for you. I've mentioned it a couple times. I do want to make a plug for our application prep program called MBA Launch. This is a great option if you are looking for some help through the application process. We offer this in kind of what I like to think of as two different flavors. So right now we have a program called MBA Launch Hybrid. That program is designed for candidates that are applying in the January deadline. So if you're thinking about applying in January, this is a great option. It would be our 7-week prep program. So kind of help you quickly go through the process. We actually do a module on all these components that I just mentioned. So if you are a January applicant, I would highly recommend this program. I'll put a link in the chat to that. If you are applying a little bit farther out, so if you're thinking about applying in fall of 2026, so if you're like, almost a year from your application, then you have time to do our live cohort, which is an 8-month prep program. So we do a lot more prep, obviously 7 weeks versus 8 months, a little bit of a difference there, but definitely highly recommend either of these programs. Our big goal as we go through the launch program is really helping you, as I said, with that confidence in your story, being able to story tell, being able to talk about what makes you special and unique is a really critical piece of all your applications to business school. I also like to think it's just about helping you build your best application. So not building the best, right? No, you're building your best application to business school, one that's authentic. And again, that reflects that wonderful story that you have. Also, we want you to do this as a part of community of peers. So both launch programs introduce you to others that are going through this process with you. You might feel like there's nobody else that you know. We have people that you can know that are going through this process. Me and my team also are wonderfully supportive of our launchers. We're excited to work with you. This is something we're super passionate about as well. And also helping you find a school that's going to be a fit for you. So it's really tough when you go on the internet to not just feel like everybody's judging everything. I think that maybe that's the theme of the internet. But helping find a business school that's going to be the right fit for you, right? You do not need to change who you are to fit into business school. There is a business school out there that fits who you are. And then the other thing is just help propel you forward, right? We're going to hold you accountable as you go through this process. We went through a lot today. It might seem a little overwhelming. So helping you make sure you're making progress towards your MBA goals. And regardless what format you choose, hybrid or live, application prep is a huge piece of what we do. As I mentioned, accountability and community. And then also just kind of some nice gimmies are some discounts on our partner services. So we do work with admissions consulting and test prep services. And then we also, about 40 of our member schools do offer fee waivers to candidates that complete the launch program, either hybrid or live. So I'd highly recommend checking those out as well. As I said, we do work with a variety of different partners. We have over 60 MBA partners that we work with across the US, Canada, UK, and Europe. And then we also have our amazing our partners that help us deliver content through this program. So regardless of which one you might be thinking about, I would say the biggest kind of differentiation between the two is when you're thinking about applying. So if you're going to be applying between now and January, check out that hybrid program. It is ready for you. It is open enrollment. If you're thinking about applying next fall or later into the future, check out that live program. We'll start together in February for that program. I'll also mention if you are going to do the live program, there's a discount on the application for that. The hybrid program, as I said, is open, and it is open now. So wonderful. A couple of upcoming events I'll also mention here. We do webinars like this all the time, and then we stream them for the most part onto YouTube. The other thing I'll mention is I'll be doing our Reddit AMA on Monday. So if I don't get to your question today, or you think of one in the next couple of days, feel free to post that on Reddit. You can go ahead and post now, and then I'll be replying live on Monday on Reddit. We also have 3 upcoming webinars that I want to mention. One is an alumni panel that we're doing on November 4th. We also have a panel about financing your MBA, everybody's favorite topic. I would say top favorite topics, right, are GMAT and financing. Everybody's favorite things, right? But join us with our friends from Juno to learn more about financing your MBA on November 7th. And then for those of you that feel like you're non-traditional, we'll have a webinar on November 12th featuring some alumni that feel like they are non-traditional as well. So I'd love for you to join us with any of those upcoming events as well. You could scan this QR code, but we'll also be sending a follow-up note with links to those events. Great. I'm happy to take some questions. So if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A. I saw a couple come through. I'll try to answer. We'll try to get to as many of these as we can in the next couple minutes, and then we will wrap up with us today. Okay, wonderful. Questions. A question from Luana. Hopefully I didn't totally butcher your name. Do you think the online 2-year MBA programs are worth it, or is it better only full-time? So kind of online versus full-time in-person MBA program. Yes. So MBA programs now are offered in a variety of different formats, online, fully online. There's obviously the traditional in-person program. There's some hybrid programs too, where you might be doing some online programs, but then at times you come to campus. I'll also say there's some programs out there that have lots of travel involved. So maybe you travel to different cities or different parts of the world. Lots of different ways that you can earn your MBA, certainly. I think it depends on 2 things, really. One is, first of all, your learning style. I am of a generation where I didn't really do any online learning. Not to date myself too much, but that wasn't necessarily a thing when I was going through my education, right? And so learning online is not something I have as much familiarity with. So for me personally, I don't think I'd be able to do an online course. I also just get really distracted easily. So I know I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd want to be able to fully commit. But if you feel like maybe due to your schedule or where you live in the world or your work, that's something you're committed to, then absolutely. Typically, a school, when they have an MBA program, it's the same degree. Regardless of how you're earning it, you're getting that degree from that school. Look at the accreditation of programs. Certainly, make sure it's an accredited program from an accredited university. But that might be the right choice for you. I will say, being in person, there's a reason why, after COVID, schools still went back to in person, right? There's some experiences that happen outside of the classroom that are really critical for an MBA program. And I would say things like networking, the social aspect of an MBA program, those I think are much harder to replicate online. Not that they, aren't some good alternatives, but I would say the full-time in-person experience is still typically the standard, either 1 or 2 years. And I think there's a reason for that, but it might not be the right fit for everybody. Okay, question here from Daniel. I'm not going to say the school, but Daniel is curious about what makes X MBA program unique and superior to other MBA programs. This is a question that I think is really the heart of what you're all trying to figure out. Like, what makes school X unique, right? And I'd say for a lot of schools, it's not necessarily one factor, but it's maybe a combination of things that makes that school stand out. And I will say for some, those features aren't maybe important to you. But I will say for some schools, some combination of maybe the programming, the courses that they offer, so maybe what specializations they have, where their faculty expertise is, coupled with maybe the size of that program, along with school culture, that's really important. So school culture is something that's kind of hard to tell just by looking at brochures, but it's really easy to tell once you start talking to students. And I would say the more students you talk to, the better. The more alumni you interact with, the better, right? You're going to start seeing some trends like, wow, every time I talk to candidates from these schools, maybe they seem really welcoming and friendly, and they talk about the community, and they talk about how much time they spent together and how great friends they are. Maybe they talk about how high achieving everybody is and how much they pushed each other academically and how competitive in a good way it was, right? You're going to start seeing some trends there and seeing what resonates with you. So I would say the best way to figure out what makes a program unique is talk to the students that have lived and breathed that experience. And if that resonates with you, great. If not, maybe you move on to another program as well. But I would say also, as you start conversations with admissions, typically, again, like reading websites, there's probably some language you'll see that lots of schools use. But again, there's some things about kind of culture and community that might help you suss that out for any of the programs that you're looking at. The date for the forum that I mentioned, there's two coming up. The large one that we have coming up that brings together over 60 of our schools is that event on December 5th. And I have a link for that here. That December 5th forum is the big one. So Monique, I will type that answer to you as well. That's on December 5th. Leah, maybe. Again, you guys, I'm trying with these names. Apologies. Blanket apologies if I mispronounce your name. But thank you for letting me try. When is it important to explain a gap in employment during the MBA application process? Ooh, great question. I love this question. I would say any gap in employment is something that you should be ready to address. However, unprompted, I would address a significant employment gap. And a significant employment gap is probably more than a few months. A few months between jobs, I would like to think you all were just being fun employed. I don't know, traveling, sitting on a beach somewhere, maybe. More than like 6 months, I'm starting to think, were you looking for a job? That sort of thing. I would say also anytime you face something like a layoff or maybe like a reduction in force, things like that, those are okay to address in an optional essay. You don't have to give the whole story, but just a little bit of a address might be nice. Typically, that's not something you'd put on a resume, but maybe something you'd put in an optional essay. But if it was a short term, I wouldn't necessarily talk about it. Also, if you took time off, maybe to care for a family member, maybe something else was going on in your life, that's sometimes good to address in an optional essay, especially if it was significant. I would definitely say if you were caring for a family member, that's not unemployment, right? You might not have been getting paid, but that is definitely something that you'd want to address in an optional essay because I'm sure it was, one of the most stressful things you did and probably one of the most impactful things you did. So, my rule of thumb is typically a couple months to 6 months you want to address that. The other thing I'll mention is if you faced any sort of unemployment during COVID, especially if it was kind of related to the pandemic, that's also something you don't need to like go on and on with an explanation about. Lots of candidates have gone through that. Also, if you were laid off in the last year, unfortunately, that has been very common. So if you were like just laid off also and you're actively applying to business school, I also wouldn't necessarily worry about it too much. But again, kind of depending on the duration and depending on the reasoning behind it, I think anything over a few months is probably good to address. What anonymous wants to know what type of candidates typically pursue an MBA plus a master's program? Yes. So there are lots of dual degrees programs out there, or joint degree programs. Those are kind of the lingo that I would use to describe those. There's lots of those out there. MBA plus a master's. So maybe that's an MBA plus a master's in finance, MBA plus a master's in business analytics. And those might be like all business, right? So that might be like business plus business. Then you have like joint degree programs, which might be like an MBA plus a master's in public health or an MBA plus a JD. We have really high achievers that are like an MBA plus an MD, things like that. I think each school is very different on the types of programs that they offer and the application process for those. I would say if you are really firm on this, you should have really strong reasons why, and you need to have really done your research about why a joint degree program is right for you. If this is just something like, oh, well, I want an MBA plus an MPP because I want to work in nonprofit. Well, like, do you need that second degree? Or, are you just like degree collecting? I think you really need to have asked yourself some tough questions and make sure you're doing that significant research process. The other thing I'll mention is sometimes that means you're going to have to submit multiple applications and keep in mind multiple timelines. Sometimes that means you have to apply to one program, start in that program, and then do the MBA program. It's going to vary across schools. So I think you really just need to have done your research about, again, like ask yourself why, and then like ask yourself why like 2 levels deeper than that to really figure out if that's going to be the right fit for you. And it might mean at some schools you just do the MBA, but at other schools you might do both. So yeah, that's a pretty specific answer. Kind of like the last question I answered. These really specific questions are something we advise a lot on in the launch program. Because again, there's not a cookie cutter answer for a lot of these. That should be my caveat, is like, it depends is a good blanket answer for anything in admissions. It depends, right? Great. Angela asks, I was part of an accelerator program, cool, and won third place. Wow, with 15K in prize winnings. Nice. That's pretty sweet. What is the chance of my tuition getting paid for at least 75% based on your story? So I would say, question about scholarship likelihood, there's kind of two things I'll say here. One is, the vast majority of schools, your application to admission is your application to scholarship. So most of the time, what you're submitting as your application for admission is also all the things that the admissions committee is going to use to consider you for scholarship. So if you're interested in a scholarship, you better be putting your best application forward anyway. But again, you're going to want to make sure that that also reflects well for any scholarship consideration. Additionally, you might find if scholarship is really important to you, so if a merit scholarship is really important to you, then you may need to weigh that against some other factors like potentially rankings of a program. So you might find a program where you're maybe above average on all the statistics is one where you might receive more scholarship dollars, right? They're like, oh, we kind of value your application more, to put it really bluntly, right? Versus a program where you're like, oh, I really don't know if I'm going to get in. This is a real stretch for me. Maybe that scholarship isn't as likely because they're big, broad strokes, right? So if scholarship is really important to you, that is a factor that you should use when developing your school list. So scholarship is absolutely kind of your cost of attending, your total cost, right? It's definitely something you can use as a criteria as you're evaluating a program, for sure. So don't think about that as like, oh, I'll apply and then think about that. That's something you should certainly think about as you go through. And I would say, broadly speaking, this might also be one where how well aligned your interests are to the strategic goals of the school may help influence some of that. So some schools might have scholarship programs specifically for entrepreneurs, right? So they might have a scholarship where it's like, hey, we're really interested in developing more entrepreneurs. So we have a center for entrepreneurship. We have a specific scholarship for entrepreneurs. We have all these activities that you can participate in, experiential learning. That to me says like, wow, that school's really interested in entrepreneurs. That might mean they're very incentivized to give more scholarship dollars to candidates that are entrepreneurs, right? See where I'm going here? So as you find schools that are a good fit for you, hopefully that also means schools are a good fit for what you're looking for scholarship-wise. But just know the MBA is an investment, right? And so there's going to be an outlay of time and effort, even if you have a full tuition scholarship. And so certainly think about, that's not going to be the only criteria that you're going to use. You want to make sure you're going to a program that's going to be the right fit for you. I'll take one last question, then I'll do a wrap up. Anonymous, how does years of experience affect the admissions process? They will have between 7 and 7.5 when they apply. As I said, the average for a lot of full-time programs is 5-ish, and the range is probably 2 to 10, so you're well within the range. It is funny, I get as many questions about am I too old as I do am I too young? And so like no one thinks they're the right age for the MBA, which is very funny to me. You're probably pretty average. It's not really years of experience also, right? It's quality of work experience. So I will say some candidates come to the MBA, they've only had 2 years of experience and are ready for it. Some candidates, you've had 10 years of experience and you're now just thinking you're ready for the MBA. So again, what is your story that you're telling authentically? How does that fit the school and what you want to do professionally? Again, your job might look a little different. Your post-MBA job hopes might look a little different if you have 8 years of experience versus if you have 2 years of experience. So that's also something to keep in mind. But look at those school averages. Look at the middle 80%, right? So schools might give you an average, but then look at the middle 80% if you can. You're going to see you probably fall within that as well. If I didn't get to your question, as I said, feel free to drop it on Reddit. Would love to hear from you there. That link is in the chat. I will put that here again. Please check out our launch program. It probably is a great fit for you. If you're applying in that January deadline, make sure you check out our hybrid program. And if you're applying later, we'd love to see you in that live cohort. Thank you all for being here today. It was my absolute pleasure. Hope you enjoyed. Please reach out. We'd love to see you at another event in the near future. And I hope everyone has a